Hi, everyone.
Hello, Kerrie.
Hi, Kerrie.
Hello. So, our conversation with Jon Underwood, the founder of Death Cafe, is live. I want to welcome you all and say a huge thanks to Jon for being with us tonight. And really, this was kind of an idea because I know lots of people are setting up death cafes in Australia, and I know for Dying to Know Day in particular, people are saying we want to run a death cafe, or a thing that we can do for Dying to Know Day is a death cafe. So I thought this might be an interesting way to record some ideas and for people to meet who are doing, for people in the public to meet people who are doing the death cafes in Australia as well as Jon. That's all really. So I thought what we do is start by just kind of everyone introducing themselves and saying a little bit about why you're here and where your death cafe is and maybe why you do it. And then, Jon, I might get you to respond. April,
Okay.
do you want to go, April?
Oh, sorry, I thought you said Ava, yeah, and then Ava smiled. So, okay, yes, I'm April, and I host Death Cafe in Sydney, in Australia. And why am I doing it? I started off with attending the Dying to Know Day event with Kerrie and some others last year, and then I went to Death Cafe, Ava's Death Cafe, when I was in Fremantle in Perth last year. Went to 2, and I went to 2 this year, I think. Ava, I can't remember now, I've lost track. But anyway, I kind of wanted to get involved because I'm of an age where I've been losing friends, and I've had friends that have lost children, and my mother's in the final stages of her life, and I've been supporting a lot of people who are either dying or have lost people. And I could just see the need for people to want to have conversations where they could be heard and listened to and not judged. And that was kind of why I got involved. So I had the inspiration from Jon and from Ava's death cafes and from Kerrie as well. So, you know, it's kind of been a part of my life forever. But this kind of feels like something really new and exciting, and it's just fantastic to be part of a growing community and to feel the support as well, that I'm not kind of going into this on my own, that, you know, there are people like you guys there, that we can have sessions like this where we can talk. And it's just, Kerrie, I think it's fantastic that you've organised this, and Jon, you know, from England, I've got no idea what time it is over there at the moment, but and, you know, I just think it's wonderful, so that's why I'm here.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Ava, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Ava, and I'm a counselor and a behavioral scientist, and I facilitate conversations about death and dying as part of my business. And I've had death and dying in my life for my whole life as well, and really became an observer of how people do and don't react to death and dying, and I became fascinated by it. So I knew I wanted to work with death and dying in some capacity, and then soon after I started my business, I found the death cafes and thought, right, this is perfect. Let's add this into the thing of what I do. And so I've been running them since March 2013, monthly, and I've had about 90 people come through the death cafes. It's pretty small here. We've got a loyal but small following. It's been growing. It has definitely been growing. And thanks to Jon, I've had an interview on Radio Australia about them, and BBC News has come to interview me. So it is catching on. It's slowly. So it's been an amazing journey to do this and to add this into everything else that I do. and to feel like I'm contributing to the well-being of people. It's such an amazing thing that you've started, Jon, and that Bernard did as well. It's I like to say that death is an idea whose time has come, and it has.
Thank you.
So that's me in a nutshell for now.
Thank you so much. Vicki.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm probably the newest kid on the block. I'm from Perth and just had the first Death Cafe in Mount Hawthorn. I call myself the Perth Death Cafe because I'm central. And thanks to Ava for all her help and support in April running the first one. But my interest goes back, look, from when I was just a small infant even. At the age of 4, we used to go to our local cemetery for family walks. And I remember being in the cemetery and bringing home the lovely pebbles off the graves, and my mum going absolutely berserk, saying, "What are you? You know, don't bring those in here." And the whole concept of death and dying became very real for me. And I can remember at the age of 4 standing there with my hands on my hips and going, "No one's going to put me in the ground and stick, you know, concrete over me and this big memorial. It's just not going to happen." And I, at the age of 17, had a very serious car accident where I was very close to death. I'm actually 20% body area burned, and at the same time my father was admitted to hospital and diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he died a year later on the same day. So in that year was my own recovery at a critical time in my life. I also lost a very dear friend. The very person who saved me from this car that was on fire actually was killed on his motorbike. So the whole death and dying thing became really close and raw for me. And then I now have no aunts, uncles, grandparents, parents. So yeah, I've experienced a lot of death and grief and loss as well. And then when the natural burial movement took a hold in the UK in the late 90s, I got really, really interested. And it was then that I decided that I wanted to have a natural burial, and I didn't want a coffin because no one's putting me in a box. I just want to be in the ground, wrapped in a shroud, much like the Muslims. Well, when I went to the cemetery board and said this is what I wanted, it was just a no-go zone. So really, I've been a strong proponent of natural burial, but that's not why I do the Death Cafe. I do the Death Cafe because I just feel it's just something we don't do well as you know, in our family particularly. We've had many opportunities to do it and do it hopefully a little bit better than the last time, but we just don't seem to do that. So when you've got 5 siblings and family and others to consider, it becomes quite tricky. So really that's where I'm at, and I just think it's really important that these conversations are the brave conversations that need to be part of everyday, ordinary, you know, what we do and what we talk about.
Thank you. Thank you. So nice to meet you, Vicki.
Oh, you too.
It's really exciting because we've got Perth, we've got Sydney, and we've got Melbourne just arrived. Kathy. Kathy, we're just, I'm not sure if you saw the questions on Facebook, but we're just introducing ourselves and saying a little bit about why you're here and a little bit about your Death Cafe and why you do it.
Well, why I'm here, I think somebody suggested that I do an art project. I mean, that's my background, is doing community arts, and somebody suggested I do one on death and dying, and I just started doing a lot of research about 2 years, and the more I researched, the more I found out about what was actually going on out there with a sort of natural death movement. The more I thought, wow, this is actually an art in itself. You know, it's not just about making pretty things about it or exhibitions. It's actually the living practice. And part of that for me, I think, is conversation. So yes, when I've done death cafes, I did a series of them for the Melbourne Fringe Festival. Because I think I've got a bit of an arts slant on it. I did it in a funeral home. and the last one I did was part of the National Bereavement Conference as well. And each time I've done one, I actually have a coffin present and do a sort of kind of small ritual at the end of just asking people to tie it, like, write down on a little, it's actually like a toe tag, but just write down something that they're proud of that they've achieved in their lives, and then attach it to a flower and place it in the coffin, just to end on a positive note, and just to kind of bring it back to life at the end of the Death Cafe as well. So that's what I've been doing. And also, I think the thing for me is that I'm really interested in tying it into other existing events. I've applied to do one at the Woodford Folk Festival, or a series of them at Woodford Folk Festival at the end of the year, and have a panel conversation there as well. So
fantastic.
Utilising spaces that are kind of already existing, where there are lots of people and already a sort of a generated audience. I mean, Woodford's already got such a great sort of culture of discussing difficult things, and I know that there are times throughout that festival where they do have kind of these ritual moments which include everyone who's on site. And one of them is really taking a moment to remember people that have died in the last 12 months. So I think it'll go down well in that space, and I think there's a hunger for it as well. So
cool. Thank you. Okay, so, I mean, John just asked me, am I going to introduce myself too? Yes, I thought I'd go after all of you. So most of you know me, but I helped co-found the Groundswell Project 4 years ago now, and the Groundswell Project is really about kind of using the arts and health to have conversations about death and dying. But I'm also a clinical psych and a researcher, so I have had a lifelong interest and curiosity about end of life and death and dying. So to me, the Death Cafe is actually one of the most fun things that I get to do, and I love it because it's so relaxed, and because people come. Well, we run a Death Cafe. There's a few of us now who do it and share the facilitation, and we do it up in the Blue Mountains in Sydney. And people come kind of saying, I want to talk about death too, and coming here to Death Cafe made me realise that I'm not abnormal, that other people want to talk about death too, and that it's not actually morbid, and it can be touching at times, but it's quite a community event and a community conversation. So that's one of the things I love about Death Cafe. Oh, and cake, that too. So thank you, John. So John.
Hi.
Thank you, Kerrie.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for organising this. I've never done anything like this before, and think it's really useful. And so thanks especially to Kerrie for making it happen. And so in terms, I guess I'll talk about my background too. And I don't think death was a major factor in my life until my late 20s, and I'm 41 now. And at that time, what happened was I chose my spiritual path. I'm a Buddhist, and got very sort of involved in that and was studying the Buddha's teachings. And one of those is about death and the importance of reflecting on death, and that just sort of opened something up for me, and I felt there was a resonance there for me. So this is about this is about 13 years ago. And so at that time I started volunteering in a hospice and trained in spiritual care for the dying. And I worked with my Buddhist centre where I was working full-time at the time, to try and start as a respite service in the local area in London for people, and didn't really happen, but we tried really hard. And then I stopped working at the Buddhist centre and went to work for the local council in London, in a very sort of deprived and diverse area. And I forgot about death pretty much entirely. So what I focused on then, there's a very deprived area, lots of people with multiple problems, and I really was focused on trying on what didn't work for them and how we could work better, how we could offer better services, more flexible, not services that required them to jump through loads of hoops, but the service that was what they wanted and was helpful and was respectful, and rather than diminish them as people, it kind of nurtured them and helped them grow. And I tried really hard, and some ideas about that I'm still keen to pursue, but I was fundamentally unable to make significant progress in achieving these objectives because of a seeming intransigence, not just in that council where there's a lot of good people, but in the whole of the UK political system. And I sort of got to the point and realised I can't do anything about this. And then I sat there for maybe 3 years thinking of what can I do, what can answer that intransigence, that stuckness, that inability to kind of be flexible and work, anyway. And I sat there for 3 years reflecting on this. And then when my daughter was born, which was in 2010, I went down to 3 days a week to spend time with her. And then I was talking to my sister, Jules Barsky, on the bus. She came down to see me in London, and I said, what I'd really like to do is some websites about death. And, that was the dam bursting then. And from being very stuck and clueless for a number of years, like for 2 weeks I couldn't sleep, and I had all these ideas that just sort of came to my mind. And since then, that's what I've been pursuing. And one of them was, so this is around August 2010, and one of the project ideas I had at that time is, well, I want to do something talking about death for people who aren't dying, who aren't dealing with the reality of it at that time. So I thought that I had that strong wish. I drew up all sorts of documents and had about 4 or 5 projects that I wanted to do. That was one of them. And then my stepdad, Alistair Reid, knew that I wanted to do that, and he gave me a clipping from the Independent newspaper, and it mentioned the work of Bernard Cretas and talked about his first Café Mortel in Paris, which had just taken place. And I knew right there and right then that was it, and that was what that was the template to follow. That was perfect. It just fitted. It's like a jigsaw piece. And so I got his book, and I tried, but it was all in French, and I tried to work out what he'd done, and couldn't make head nor tail of it, really. So it took me about 10 months to get round to organising the first Death Cafe, and the thing that fell into place was a friend talked about pop-up restaurants and pop-ups in different places. And so I thought, okay, we live in this nice house, so I thought, okay, I could just do it here. And then I've got control, and that made me feel sort of safe and empowered. And I asked my mum, Sue Barsky-Reid, who's a psychotherapist and, is very just a wise woman, if she'd facilitate. And she said, sure, yeah, that sounds good. So I invited a number of people that I knew And there were 6 of us, some very dear friends of mine, one person that I didn't know, very diverse group. And then I had to work out what we were going to do. And so I scripted it really, really carefully. I wrote down, first we're going to hang up the coats, and then we'll walk into where I'm stood right now. And then I'll take the drinks orders. I was the waiter and my mum was the host, and then she would tell them something. And, you know, every bit was scripted. And we went downstairs, and the first bit was sort of writing things, and then we put them in envelopes, and at the end we burn the envelopes, and there's all this stuff. And despite that, the occasion was wonderful, because this one of the people I didn't know for the first time was able to voice her terror, which she'd never talked about before, because she said that she thought, you know, she'd be locked up, she'd be categorized as insane if she ever shared how scared she was about death and how she had flashes of panic and everything. And, you know, everyone, this was with a group of strangers, apart from one guy she knew before, but she said this, and it was beautiful, and it was sort of transformative. So at the end of it, you know, we were hooked, I think. But my mum said, you know, all that writing and that burning and those envelopes and stuff, she said, just let people talk. And so the second one, we just let people talk. And that subsequently has been our USP. It's just letting people talk. So my mum sort of supplied that. So that's a background from me.
That's cool. Ava just put up a question. Did you want to ask that, Ava?
Sure, John. How many people did you have at the first one?
There were 6 plus my mum and me. I was the waiter. So there was a Buddhist nun whose venerable Palmo subsequently died. My friend Fairy, who helped me sort of put together this model, and his friend, the one who's terrified, someone from Harmlets Council, my good friend Mark, who I was working with. I think there's one more, but I can't remember who. Oh yeah, Christy West. Christy West.
Oh, Christy, who's here in Australia at the moment.
Yeah, she's in Sydney, I think. Yeah. She was at the first one too.
Oh.
Thank you.
Well, one of the questions that I had was, what are your thoughts on why the Death Cafe movement's taken off? And can you tell us a bit about how many now? What are you up to? And where? Everywhere, aren't they?
Yeah, we've had just over 900. The numbers on the website aren't entirely accurate, and those have either taken place or are planned in 19 countries, so 900 across 19 countries, and soon, before summer's over, it will be 1,000. And looking back 12 months, looking back 12 months, we've had about 100, so that means 800 in the past 12 months. And I hope to be able to offer really accurate statistics on this. We've got all the data about every Death Cafe that's ever been listed on the site. But what's happened is we've shifted from our old site to our new site, and we didn't have the capacity to do all the data entry that's necessary to shift all the information about the old Death Cafes to the new site. So there's about 178 which aren't on the new site, and when we bring them across, we can give accurate statistics about how many, at what time and where, and draw a nice graph and those things. But I mean, one thing that's important about Death Cafe is this is all the work of volunteers. You know, you and me. It's just volunteers. We've not, like, I got paid to go on telly this week and on the radio by the BBC. I got an appearance fee of 200 quid, and and that is the first money I've ever earned from Death Cafe. We've had donations of 75 quid from 2 people, and then $100 from America, and a couple of expense payments. But I think our total income is round about £500. since 2010 that I've seen anyway. So yeah, it's all. I mean, just making a point that we're all volunteers, and that's one of the wonderful things about it. I mean, yeah, not necessarily sustainable, but I'm proud we've got so far on purely volunteer energy, is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, I mean, in terms of it having taken off, I think there's two things really. One, and the much bigger thing, is that it's representative of a shift that's taking place. You know, for me, the fact that it's happening so much is like a flag. It's a flag which shows something about a change that's happening in society. So it's just sort of pointing at something else. It's not that we've done something magically clever. It's rather that this has been the right thing at the right time. But in terms of that, I think the thing that is our USP, the thing that makes us special, is that we're very non-directive. We start where people are at, and we don't profess to have any answers, because I mean, a lot of the agencies who are operating in this territory will give you some suggestions about how you handle death and dying, like plan your funeral, make a will, sort out organ donation, you know, tell your friends and family, all those kind of things, have the conversation. And you know, that makes perfect sense. I'm not dismissing that. I mean, it's very evidence-based, and all those things are really worth doing. But the thing is that I think there's a lot of disempowerment in death. So what has happened over the course of, you know, not too long, the past 100 or so years, is that the real movement of death from being a community-held thing to it being held very sort of professionally by funeral directors and medics, and, you know, the invisibility of death that we've kind of decided to bring about. So death's kind of gone out of sight, and I think that sort of robs people of something. And what we do is we don't have any of those answers. We just let people talk and explore where they're at themselves. And so I think Death Cafe goes against that feeling of disempowerment that the outsourcing of death has kind of engendered, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I think that's why Death Cafe has been so successful, because, you know, it's empowering. We're not telling people what to think. It's just you know, if you tell people what to think with the best intentions and with the best evidence, it narrows down the conversation around death. You know, it can't help but do that. But really, we broaden it out to its maximum extent. There's no constraints. You take it wherever you want to go. There's no right answers. We haven't got any. The only right answers for you are your own. And I think that feels sort of liberating and helps people regain maybe some confidence that they can handle these situations, and this is part of human life, and there's a richness to be gained from looking at death, as well as, you know, a sadness. Anyway.
Do other people want to respond to that? I mean, one of the things that I love about Death Cafe is that kind of open discussion, and there's no set agenda. Like, I'm not coming along with an agenda or with a schedule as such, and the conversation just flows from that. And a lot of people ask me, but what do people talk about? Don't people, you know, what do you have? And I think that's one of the fears before you run a Death Cafe. It's like, what will people talk about? Will we have to fill in the gaps with something? And I've never had to. But could others respond?
Sure. I bring a list of topics with me, but they never get used. It's just I think what it ends up doing is making people feel comfortable, like there's something to hold on to. And what ends up happening is we just go off in all kinds of different directions. I just set the scenes, and quite often one of the things I say is that there is no right or wrong. There's no one way to have this conversation. It's whatever people bring to the table, and I've had all kinds of conversations come up, things that I wouldn't have ever thought of, but they relate to death and dying, so it's fascinating. I'm always curious about who's going to bring what. And I love hearing people's stories.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think what I found too is that in the sharing, people come to realise that they're not having a unique, well, obviously it's a unique experience for them, but there's some common ground. And also the fact that they're able to have conversations in a safe space where there's no judgment, and they're respected, and they're able to say really how they feel without fear of being judged. And for me, I think that's the beauty of it as well, that we're providing a space for people to be able to speak and to be heard as well with empathy by others.
Yeah, great. John, I have a question here about, you were planning a physical death cafe, and then I thought then I might ask you about that, and then I think we should get on to discussing what running a death cafe and kind of talking about some of the guidelines and other things. But you have plans afoot for a physical death cafe. How's that going?
Yeah, it's going well.
What is a physical death cafe?
Okay, that's a good place to start. So how I'm looking at it is it's a building that you can actually visit in central London, and it has the words Death Cafe above the door.
Right.
And it's got two functions. One is a cafe, and the other is an events function. And the objective of it is the same as for Death Cafe, the whole thing, which is to raise awareness of death with a view to helping people make the most of their finite lives. So the cafe is a good cafe by any standards. It's a welcoming and friendly place. There are indications that remind you of death there, but they're not in your face. No one pushing anything, and you're welcome to eat and drink in there and talk about death if you'd like to, but there's no obligation. But it's an open, death-positive space in which, people who are dealing with those issues are free to come if they want to, and so is everyone else. And then the events function is, it will obviously be set up to have death cafes there, and there'll be a rolling program of them, and some of them will have facilitators who happen to be passing through London. So if you're ever in town, you'd be able to host your own death cafe in the real death cafe. But alongside that, it would host all manner of other events around death and dying. So one thing that we found is the death cafe model, which is just letting people talk without any agenda or without hardly any structure, as we've kind of said, is really useful. It's really powerful thing. It works for a lot of people in a lot of circumstances. But of course, there are a multitude of different ways for working around death. So we're all different, and we can bring art to it. We can use music, poetry, performance. We can have spoken word. We can have film showings. We could have whatever it is that people are minded to offer. And so the Death Cafe really is to invite this kind of work into existence. So yeah, and it's going really well. I did my first business plan, and the numbers are scary. because the cafe market in London is really congested. You know, we've had a real decline of pub culture and a growth of cafe culture, and especially in central London, there are coffee shops everywhere. And for this to survive economically, it has to function as a really good cafe, regardless of anything else. So getting that right is that's a challenge, and I've been asking the universe to sort of send me a cafe person to come and set this up for me, and no cafe person has manifested. So what that means is that I'm the cafe person here. So, but one thing that I've hopefully found connected with a significant backer who's willing to put enough money into it for this to be a viable proposition, and I don't have the money to bankroll this. I'm very poor, so how it's going to work is we'll go to the Death Cafe community and offer them the opportunity to buy shares in Death Cafe London. So if people want to invest a certain amount in owning part of the Death Cafe, then they'll be able to do so. And so we hope to attract backers that way, and this will hopefully be an investment opportunity based on the success of that individual Death Cafe, and hopefully people will be able to sell their shares later on if they so want to. So they're not, it's not a donation, it's an investment opportunity. But then if it's successful, what I'd like to do is to license that to other people who want to open their own Death Cafes in their own location. And there would, as with Death Cafe as it stands, there'd be sort of certain, there'd be a structure to it. There'd be certain things which it is and which it isn't, which anyone wanting to do it would be asked to sign up to. And hopefully they would pay a fairly small amount to Death Cafe to help it function as an organisation, and potentially even employ somebody, which would be good. But then the Death Cafe will be theirs to run. So hopefully we hope to create more death spaces and more death-related employment opportunities to work creatively in this sector. So, I've been road testing this idea for the first half of this year. Solid, and it's going to work, I'm sure, and it's going to happen. The thing is that it takes a lot of time, and not to be rushed, it's to be done right. And obviously, as I'm setting this up as a volunteer as well. I'm not getting paid to set up this cafe either, so that means that things are slow.
Great. Can I just need to do a technical thing for a second. Vicki, I think we're getting some background noise from your microphone, and I was wondering if you could either put your headphones in, I think we might have a bit of echo happening in your room, which is actually causing the picture to flip back and forth.
Okay, let me try.
While you're sorting that out, I just thought I'd just make a comment to Jon that people could leave their shares in the Death Cafe to others in their wills.
Yeah, good idea.
I see reminiscence of Hard Rock Cafe. Oh, sorry.
There's also a question here from Vicki saying, have you thought of establishing a social enterprise as a business model?
I mean, how I'm thinking of it working is each Death Cafe will be an individual company, separate and sort of owned by those shareholders and the people who brought it into existence. So Death Cafe London will be a not-for-profit company separate from Death Cafe and the other stuff that I do. So that will be a separate entity. So each Death Cafe will be an individual business. Yeah, so that's I think is that what you meant, or something else?
kind of social enterprise. We have sort of things starting up here in Australia, like for example in Melbourne we have Lentil as Anything, where people attend the cafe restaurant, but they pay what they feel it's worth.
Oh yeah.
So, you know, there's no set prices for anything. They will just gift whatever they feel that it's worth to them to be there and to have that experience.
Yeah,
Gift economy.
No, someone else suggested that. It's an interesting idea. Yeah.
They've just started one in Sydney as well, and they're staffed mainly by volunteers.
Yeah, great.
Kerrie, is that better? I have got my earphones on now. Okay.
I think it is. It stopped flicking. I'm not sure if other people are getting that experience too, but it was flicking back and forth. And I'm also watching the YouTube channel, and there's less flicking happening now. So I would love for you to give us like a crash course, Jon. Imagine there are some people watching this who want to run a death cafe and who are keen to get started. And then I thought we'd quickly go around and get everyone's top tip for starting a death cafe in Australia. How does that sound?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Do you want me to go first, the overview first?
Well, I think so, yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I think the first thing is please have a read of the guide. And some people, there's some people who just get Death Cafe, you know, they just click with it, and some people as well, they get really excited by it, and what happens is they sort of think it's X, Y, and Z. They sort of get an idea of it which is kind of different from what it is, and not from any sort of negative reason, out of excitement and their own kind of enthusiasm for working in this sector. But I mean, Death Cafe is it's a global social franchise which is run entirely by volunteers, and keeping it coordinated and consistent is quite a task in that context. So that has required us to be fairly specific about what the Death Cafe model is. So the first thing that people need to do is check that they understand what it is before setting one up. And so it's in our guide, which is on our website, which is, you know, it's not bad. It needs an update in a couple of places. But the crucial thing about us is that it's group-directed discussion. So we would never have a themed death cafe. Like, we'd never have a death cafe about funerals or anything like that. So we'd never have a death cafe about advanced decisions. It's not themed. It never has a sort of guest speaker where someone gives a lecture and then there are questions asked after it. And there's nothing, it's not to disparage those different models, or it doesn't have, you know, films shown in it. It doesn't have expression or meditation or any of those things. It's simply group-directed discussion around death and dying. That's what a death cafe is, and that's it. That's our model, and that's what people. That's the most difficult thing, because people sometimes misinterpret it. So please, people should check that they understand what it is through reading the guidance, and that's the main thing. I mean, after that, things generally fall into place. You need about 4 things in order to organize a death cafe, to hold a death cafe. You need a facilitator. You need a space in which the death cafe is to happen. You need people to come along, and you need tea and cake. And so the role of the facilitator is fairly, you know, it's kind of straightforward, but on the same level it's kind of subtle as well. There, as we discussed previously, their kind of role is to hold the space, so that people coming to the Death Cafe feel safe to share and to have the conversation to the degree to which they want to do so. And also the facilitator is responsible sort of guiding the flow of the event. So generally what happens is a brief introduction with an overview of what the concept is and what's going to happen, and sort of touching on some ground rules like respect for others' views, which is really important.
That was my cat just jumped on the computer. Sorry about that. She wants to be in it.
Live event. It's the joy of the live event.
And so respect for others' views and confidentiality. This is again just part of making a safe space, and the facilitator would then generally invite each person to say, who they are and what's brought them to Death Cafe, and that just allows people to say what's on the top of their head, whatever's most present for them, and it often differs between one person and the next, which illustrates to me that people often have something right there that's quite present for them. They're not sort of listening to the person sitting next to them and influenced by them. They very much have their own perspective that they're coming from. So that allows people to sort of say something. It engages them. It starts from where they are, and oftentimes you get some sort of really amazing stuff said at that point. When everyone's sort of gone round, which can take, I've had it take an hour and 20 minutes just to do that with a group of 10 people. It's really just open discussion, and this is a scary part as a facilitator because you really just open the floor, and there's a risk that no one's going to say anything. And in that case, it is useful to have a sort of couple of prompting questions that you might choose to use, just to reassure yourself that there's not going to be an awkward silence. But usually what happens is the conversation just happens as it needs to, and it feels very equitable. It feels like people who want to talk get space to do so. It doesn't often, it tends to have a nice sort of tone and pace. Not too crowded. When people, are saying things that are emotional for them, the group tends to sort of hold them very sort of gently and appropriately, and not be too prescriptive, but offer some sort of sincere advice if it's useful. So the quality of the dialogue is just incredible, and as a facilitator, you just have to be able to sort of trust and relax and in that and enjoy that. So that's your reward, and then of course you sort of close the space. So that's the facilitator's role. In terms of the actual space itself, it can be anywhere, and we've had them in all sorts of places, in festivals, in tents, in people's houses, in busy coffee shops, outside in the park, wherever. It's important that it's accessible, that people are comfortable, but if it's helpful if it's quiet, if people if possible, can have their own space in which to talk. That's helpful, but it is quite flexible, and that's linked to refreshments as well. So we always have tea and cake, and some places obviously make it easier to provide those things, like if you have it in a cafe. So refreshments are an integral part of our model, and it's always important to consider how you get those. And then there's people, and it's really up to you how you go about that. I would say that posting your event to the Death Cafe website is a great place to start, because it gives you your own page that you can then link to. But I wouldn't say that is you can't just do that and assume that people will come. Maybe they will, and maybe they won't. But generally, it's a lot more successful if you do some proactive publicity, which could be contacting your friends and your personal networks, or the networks of people in your community that you think might be interested in this kind of thing. It can be starting a Facebook page. It can be tweeting about it, or putting up posters. We've also done. Contacting the media, especially if you're the first one in a specific area or country, then that can be really effective too. And the media tend to play this one fairly straight. And if you're signed up to our principles, then you're authorized to be a Death Cafe representative to the local media. And that doesn't mean that you can't put across your own views and opinions and personality, but rather that those should be clearly differentiated from Death Cafe itself, which doesn't have any sort of views about anything. It's completely neutral. It stands nowhere. But you can talk about yourself and what you feel and what you do. It's important, not if you're working in the industry. It doesn't work to be over promotional of other things, especially if they're commercial enterprises. That kind of doesn't feel right. So please don't do it. But I mean, if you do you don't have to not mention your business as well if you are in that field, and you can talk about it. But I think it goes wrong with that regard if people organize the Death Cafe with the primary intention of promoting their business. Then that doesn't work. But if your business gets better as a side benefit of you organizing the Death Cafe, then that's good for everyone.
Cool. Wow, Jon, that's like a major crash course. That's awesome. Thank you. I think it'd be great to hear from everyone, like about, respond, I guess, to some of what Jon said, but also perhaps just briefly talk about, what did I say before? One thing that, no, I can't remember my question now. One thing that's worked for you in your cafe, or one thing that...
Yeah, you said like the top tips, top 2 or 3.
Thank you.
Yeah,
your top tip for other people in starting a Death Cafe. Who am I going to pick on? Kathy.
I think that works, that can actually create enough privacy. Like the woman that I work with, one of the things that we found really tricky was actually finding a place that would be willing to kind of hold it like a public sort of space, that was willing, and we didn't have much luck at first kind of gaining any interest in people being willing to hand over sort of or put aside space in their kind of cafe that was also private enough. So that was, kind of getting a venue, I think, is a really important part of it. So I think, and that's really about partnerships, I think, with, either with a cafe or some other sort of place that doesn't go against the aims of Death Cafe. And I guess it's just kind of working out how to look after those relationships in a way that's that suits the model as well.
So any tips about how have you done that? How have you found a place that suits your needs and also is appropriate for the venue and maybe the manager of that venue? Sorry, Kath, we just lost you.
I think that's
She's lagging.
Do you want to try that again? Go. Oh, Kath, I'm so sorry. We can't hear you very well. Do you want to just try reconnecting, and we might come back to that question? Is that okay?
I think she's frozen.
Yeah, okay.
While we wait,
Ava, do you want to go? And I'll just
Sure.
send a message to Kathy.
Sure. My top tip is to be patient. I started the Death Cafe at a festival, at it's called the Nectar Festival, and it was for all women, by women, and I had 8 people, and then over a period of a few months, it trickled to 1, and then, oh, something happened.
All right, dropped my phone.
And then it picked up again, and I had it was a few factors that contributed to it. Was definitely the place, as Kat was saying. I'm still trying to find the right place. We have a number of cafes available in Fremantle, but some of them are too noisy, some of them are not quite the right venue, some of them have the wrong owner that's just not really open to what I'm doing or what we're doing, and so it's just been a bit of a struggle. But I think through all of this I've seen is to just be patient, because even if one person shows up, it's still a Death Cafe and they're still benefiting from the conversation, and so am I. So I had these grand ideas that I was going to get lots of numbers of people, and I've had the most in one cafe I've had is 14, and that was brilliant. It was perfect, and it was in the right location and all of that. And so yeah, I'm just open to. There's something about open source directory or something like that. Is whoever shows up are the right people that show up. Whenever it starts is the right time. Whatever is said is the right thing, and when it's over, it's over. And I really take that in with all of this as well. There's no right way or wrong way to do it. It's just as long as the conversation happens and people get to have a few treats, and it's all good. So I think that'd be the biggest thing, is just to be patient with starting one, and to building the ark. The people will come.
Thank you. That's great. John, did you want to respond to any of that? I thought I might have heard you making a noise then.
No, just totally agree with what Ava said.
Cool. April?
I'd just like to second what the 2 ladies have said, that for me, I think it is about sourcing the venue and getting the right venue, or a venue where the owners are aligned with what we are doing. And my very first Death Cafe I ran in a place that was recommended to me by some other people, and I always go along and check out the place myself and get a feel for it, sit there, talk to the owners about what I'm doing, and kind of feel how they're feeling about it. I kind of went against my instincts for the first cafe because I felt that the venue was perfect in terms of the physical layout, that there was a really big room at the back which was private, but it was kind of connected to the rest of the cafe, and it was fairly quiet. It would be... Sorry, that was my dog. That would be great. What I didn't realise was the cafe was actually closing. That was their last day of business, and they hadn't told me that, so they were kind of in a hurry to get us out, and they were making a lot of noise kind of stuff. So then I found another place which was much better suited, and the owners, as I said, were very aligned to what we were doing and were very, very supportive, and that made such a difference. So again, I think it's about letting go of expectations, kind of like letting go of an attachment to a particular outcome, that it's just go with the flow, go with your gut feeling, and as long as you're on track in terms of purpose, it'll come together. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Now,
Thank you. Yeah, Vicki, I know that you, I wonder if you have some thoughts, seeing that you're headed towards your first step.
Yeah, I hosted my first one, and I actually identified the venue earlier. We have a great venue, the Bodhi Tree Cafe. It's a bookstore as well, and the owner is sort of attuned to the Buddhist philosophy, and it's just a great environment. So I was really lucky because I did identify that as my place to start with, and had her support. But I guess I'd go back to what April said, and it's about the expectation. I was honestly, really, I feel I'm quite a good, like trained facilitator, but I was absolutely like terrified because thinking, what's going to happen here, and holding a space where there's no agenda, and but I have to say, I did check out with people who'd already run them, like there's Sarah Winch in Queensland. Ava was very generous, so that gave me a lot of confidence. And I read the other posts that are on Jon's website, read the guidelines, so really did some good research and felt quite comfortable and kind of got the sense that just let it run, basically. And I have to say, I've had my first one, it was a couple of weeks back, and I really loved that I had a mix of people from different cultural perspectives. I actually had a bloke, and I commend you, Jon. I mean, you've initiated this thing, but I think more women than men seem to subscribe to this sort of open conversation. I was thrilled with the way it went. It was just right. It was just the right number, right setting. I had, luckily, as I say, Ava, April, and we had another beautiful woman, Maria, who knew April, who joined us as well. So it really, there was about 8 of us, 9 of us. And I was really lucky. One of the guys in the group is a writer, and he's actually written a bit of a review on it, which was really generous as well. And we took photos. So, look, it was all good. So I'd just go jump in and get your feet wet.
Great. So what I got from that, just to kind of summarize, was read the guidelines, pay attention to the venue and alignment with the venue, trust your instincts, go with the flow, talk with others, and that also connects with kind of, check in with your expectations about the event as well.
Yeah.
I would say my experience too was very much kind of letting go of like no agenda. I was equally terrified as excited by letting go of the agenda. And the more I do the Death Cafe, the more I love that there's no agenda. I just love it. Yeah. And blokes came up too. I'm not sure what we can do about that. Any tips for blokes then? Maybe we could have, instead of Death Cafe, Death at the Pub.
Yeah. That might work. Yeah.
Would you let us mess with Death Cafe once in a while and call it Death in the Pub in Australia?
Death in the Pub. Maybe you should.
Death over a beer.
Yeah.
Death over a beer.
Coffee and tea.
Yeah. But I think I really admire people who sort of connect with this work and decide to do it, and because it is quite deep work, and it is connected with a lot of important things in our society, and I think, by organising a Death Cafe, you really it's a powerful, meaningful, real way to deliver social change and positive social change. But that connects you with those sort of deep currents, so it's a real thing, and I really do admire the sort of courage of people who do it and who make that change, and that's one of the things that I'm most proud about this work, is how it's brought together a certain community of people who maybe weren't connected before, people who, everyone's doing this as a volunteer, and you guys are passionate enough about this subject to work to bring these conversations to your communities, and I just really admire that, and think the impacts will be really significant, and really positive as well. So, it's great to be working with you.
John, as
Fantastic.
I said earlier, it's great to be part of this community, and I think it's amazing how we, like-minded people attract others and are attracted to others. That recently I was in Perth just for 2 weeks visiting my mum, and the 2 Saturdays that I went, the first Saturday I spent with Ava at her Death Cafe in Fremantle, and the other Saturday I went to Vicki's Death Cafe in Perth, the first one that she hosted. And prior to that, for a week, I was away visiting my brother in a place called Coffin Bay. And it's just this deathy thing that, we seem to want to be involved in it, and just, it's something to celebrate and to enjoy finding each other and having company with like-minded people who want to share conversations about death and dying. And it's not all crying and tears. It's joy and laughter and jokes and, having fun, hanging out together.
Cool. April, you had some questions. You had a question before we began too, and I wondered, I'm getting aware of the time, so we've been on for about an hour now, and I reckon we should probably, what are your thoughts? We should probably go for another 10 minutes at the most. What do you think?
Yep.
Sounds cool.
So maybe a couple of questions, and then we might sum up and say goodbye. But April, you had a question. You had a couple of great questions.
Well, the question that's foremost in my mind is about numbers, because I've held 2 death cafes where I had about 12 people, and I've got another one coming up which I'm kind of limiting the numbers to 15. But I've had some inquiries from people who want to host death cafes, and one of them's from a person who's going to have, he's already got about 40 people, I think, that are going to go. And I was just wondering how you would manage having a large number of people, because I've heard that could work equally well, but the model that I'm used to is kind of holding a space for about 15 people that don't break off into private conversations, and each person is heard by the group.
Yeah, there's kind of 2 ways to do it. The way that you do it, which in the guide we call cafe style, so that's having one facilitator with a group of people. And there's another model which is called salon style, which they use primarily in larger death cafes like in Portland, Oregon, and New York, where you'll have facilitators who will introduce the session from the start and give an overview and set the context and whatnot, and then there'll be smaller groups who say 4 or 5 people generally, who will talk amongst themselves, and sometimes people mix each other, the groups mix up at the end of or halfway through or something like that. And, both of them work fine, so it's entirely possible to have a death cafe with larger number of people. I mean, the responsibility is really for the host and the facilitator to provide the event in the best way, including ensuring that it's, that everyone feels safe in order to have the conversation that they need to have. So it's about, if there's a larger group, having enough resource, not one facilitator for each table, but enough facilitators who would sort of float around and make sure the conversation is all right. So that kind of thing can be planned for. But, I get asked a lot about the safety of death cafes in a way that I don't think, if I was running a book group which was similarly big, people would ask about that. So I think the fact that people ask about the safety of death cafes is indicative of their own fear, really, of what will happen if people actually do start talking about death. But in my opinion, or in my experience rather, the people who are attracted to death cafes are very safe to talk about death and dying. They don't generally have, they don't generally become even overwhelmed by emotion, never mind approaching any sort of state of mind which would be concerning. And in my experience, we've had over 900 death cafes, and I've only heard about a very small number of adverse incidences at any of them. So I think death cafes are very, very safe events in general. However, it is incumbent on the organisers to make it safe, both practically in terms of fire escapes and whatnot, but also emotionally safe. So if someone does come whose mental state causes concern, then the facilitator and host should be able to handle that situation and be sufficiently resourced to do so, and have, for example, have some idea about what services would be appropriate for referral in the local area and that kind of thing.
Thank you. I just want to check in with everyone about, we've got some funny noise coming in. Can everyone hear that?
Yeah.
Everyone just do a quick sound check in their room.
Yeah, I've been putting mine on mute and it hasn't changed the noise, so I don't think it's me. It sounds like it's a TV or something.
Yeah.
Oh, radio, maybe.
Okay. Let me check. Hang on.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much for talking about cafe style versus salon style.
Yeah.
I think that's even something that I might have missed in the guidelines. And I'm going to revisit that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. From my perspective, you've got, I have the people who've come together around Death Cafe are an incredible group of people, who haven't necessarily been brought together before. So, incredibly skilled, incredibly capable people, which is, fantastic from my perspective. And there's sort of a feeling that, just wanting to empower those people to do whatever feels right, whatever they think is needed. But on the other hand, counterbalancing that, there's a sort of need for a consistency and say what Death Cafe is. And as a volunteer, we don't have any training program. We don't have any quality assurance. We don't check every Death Cafe. Everyone's modified that gets put on the site, but we don't do more than the minimum. We don't have anyone, a support line or anything like that, just because we're completely volunteer run. So because of that, there is a set of guidelines, and do ask people to sort of read them and sign up to them and act in accord with them as much as possible.
I think, but also, John, there's something about that encourages people to reach out to their community, to the Death Cafe community in their country or state or city, and also, you risk, I guess, going into that kind of professionalised model that you were talking about previously. Death's become so professionalised that why, do we need a training package to sit around and talk about death? Probably not. So I really like the idea of you're kind of encouraging us in a way to reach out to each other, and that's what we've all done.
Yeah, no, it's great, and I'm sure that those connections will be really fruitful as well. Because this is the thing about that that I guess I'm most proud of, is that we've established a community, a community of like-minded people with. Just to all coalescing around this idea about that it's useful to talk about death for some people sometimes, but because that is so far away from the norm in most societies, it's really powerful to see such an amazing group of people all with a similar opinion about these things. And I'm sure that, it will change, it will result in big changes in society in ways that it's hard to predict at the moment.
And just on that note about empowerment, John, I really like that, because what is disempowering is for people who want to be able to speak about death and dying with family or friends and being shut down and told that it's morbid or you know, that death is scary and it's something that people shouldn't talk about. Bringing it from the dark into the light and enabling people to be able to have those conversations is so empowering, and to be able to do it in a space where there isn't judgment and where, you know, people listen with empathy and can suspend their own belief systems to be able to listen to others is incredibly empowering.
Yeah,
and that's the gift that, you know, you've brought to this community, you know,
well,
that we providing that space.
No, I mean, I've been a facilitator and I'm a volunteer too, and there's other people being involved like Bernard Crittaz, so I'm part of this chain, as are you. And this is a community of change, and that we're all part of, really. But what do I want to say? Yeah, I think. Go.
Oh, I was just going to say, my contention has always been about the commercialisation and kind of the funeral industry having the whole, like, and it's at a time, if you haven't discussed or thought about these things, it's the most vulnerable time at the time of death, like, you know, to actually be making those decisions. So you're not in the best place often to be doing that, and if you have got a large family or there's a few people involved, that's where the tricky bit comes in, and I think it's really good to be really clear or have indicated what your preferences are, you know, what sort of choices you'd like, because it's open, and the thing is we're so directed by the funeral director because, you know, it just allows them to really take over, I guess, because you haven't had those conversations. So I can remember when I first got interested in this, there was a resource centre that one of our local directors had, and I used to go down there, and it was great because I was getting information that no one else could get, that the consumer out there on the street would never get. And they said to me, "Oh, are you dying?" And I said, "Actually, no, I'm not. I'm perfectly healthy. You know, do you want to save trees?" And I said, "No, not at all. I'm just looking at my options." And, you know, this whole idea, too, that we all get embalmed, and I'm going, but if someone's going to be cremated, why would you even embalm them? Like, but no one's asking those really, to me, quite pertinent questions. We just go, and there's an easy $1,500 that the funeral director's just made because we think that's, you actually have to opt out, not opt in. So I just, you know, it's all that sort of stuff. It just fascinates me how we just enable that.
Great. Really great points. Ava's got a question.
Just a quick one. It's been a burning question all this time. Jon, have you met Bernard? And if you have, what does he think of all of this?
No, I've never met him, and
Wow.
we've had. I've tried. I wrote to him earlier this year and said I'd love to meet you, but I haven't had a response. And he's pretty. I think he's stopped doing death cafes now, and he's just sort of. I don't know what he's doing, to be honest.
I watched a documentary. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No.
Go ahead. Oh, I watched a documentary called The Tightrope of Life by a Canadian woman. I forget what her name is, and she interviewed him in his village about the casket of wine and the round of cheese and how the couple creates that on their wedding day and then eats it on their funeral. And I just found it was very fascinating about how where he comes in, where he ties in with all of this as well.
No, yeah, I mean, he came. So the ideas of meeting in a public place and talking about death and having food and drink there come from him. Yeah. And the name Death Cafe is a translation. The translation that the Independent used when I saw the article about him. He calls it Café Mortel, and so Death Cafe was the translation. So, but I mean, because of language barriers, really, we developed our own model. I tried to. I still don't know what his model is, whether it's the same or different. And I've tried to initiate conversations with him, but they've never really happened, and so I've never met him, and I really hope to.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe he'll see this broadcast.
Yeah, maybe we can get him to join our next one.
Yeah,
I do try and ensure he's appropriately credited. I mean, because
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I want to just acknowledge Kathy, who's had technical problems and hasn't been able to make it, and Hayley West as well, who tried to get on board and who also couldn't make it to this part. So I just want to acknowledge both of them. And April, you've got an idea, and a few of us have kind of talked about this, but finishing up by talking about what death cafes are running, and obviously these aren't everyone. This isn't the whole of Australia. It's some of the people who've been running them in Australia. So sharing what we're doing next, and then we might kind of say some final words and finish up. Does that sound okay?
Yep.
Yeah. Great.
Well, let's go in alphabetical order again. April.
Okay, so my next Death Cafe is on the 14th of June from 2 o'clock till 4 p.m. That's Eastern Standard Time in Australia, so in Sydney. And probably the best place for people to find a Death Cafe is to go to Jon's website or to the Death Cafe website, which is www.deathcafe.com. And there's a tab that says Find a Death Cafe, and if they just type in Sydney, Australia, mine will come up. Yeah, and just a quick thing too, for those of you who are in Australia, or in fact around the world, FM 99.3 this coming Saturday at 9 o'clock Sydney time, I'm doing an interview about Death Cafes. Well, that'll be my second radio interview, so people can stream that if they're outside of Australia. But anyway, that's my next Death Cafe. So look forward to seeing people there. But have to register first.
Thanks, April. Ava.
Oh, yes, mine is on the same day, only on the other side of the country. So it's June 14th, and it's from 1 until 3. What is it? We're not Pacific Standard. We're Indian Ocean. I don't know.
Western Australian Standard.
Western Australia. And it's in Fremantle, and as well you can find me on the Death Cafe website. I've got a Death Cafe Fremantle Facebook page as well, and I also link my website to it as well. And I'm going to Vancouver. This is going to be my last one in Fremantle until September, and then while I'm away, I'll be in Vancouver, and I'm hoping to run 1 or 2 while I'm there as well. So I'll be posting that up onto the Death Cafe website as an event as well. And I'm hoping I can get a place that's as beautiful as the one Vicki has chosen. There are many more cafes like that over there than there are in Fremantle. So, yeah, the next one is June 14th here in Fremantle.
Thank you. That sounds wonderful. Vicki, my apologies.
Okay, well, first,
I think I said that you hadn't run a Death Cafe before, so I'm so sorry about that.
No problem.
Apologies.
I'd just commend you and acknowledge you, Kerrie, for the effort in putting this together. It's been an amazing opportunity, so thank you, and thank you, Jon, and thank you, Ava and April. Just quickly, my next Death Cafe is at the Bodhi Tree, which is in Mount Hawthorn. It's a Perth Death Cafe Facebook for more details, and it's on the 28th of June. So,
wonderful.
Yeah.
At your beautiful cafe. That now
I know, I've been really lucky.
So, Death Cafe, the Death Cafe we run at Katoomba we don't have any upcoming events at the moment, but we'll probably organise the next one probably close to Dying to Know Day. But I guess I want to kind of do a general shout out to people about Dying to Know Day on August the 8th. Really, it's a day to kind of have a conversation about death and dying, and Death Cafe is like the perfect way to, a perfect event, I think, to run, to get involved in having a conversation about end of life. So I guess I want to do a general plug. What about you, John? When's your next Death Cafe?
No, I don't know. I've done 2 this year so far, but yeah, I don't have time to set them up. I'm afraid. No, but maybe in the real Death Cafe whenever that manifests. Yeah, but
good incentive to come to London.
Yes, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think it's gonna happen now. This week, someone pledged some money, and it's gonna happen, and so that's incredibly exciting. And yeah,
in my experience of coffee in London is if you've got really great coffee, people will come.
Yeah, yeah, that has to be there. There's no question. Yeah, and it's going to serve comfort food of various types.
Nice.
It sounds perfect. Well, I'm up for investing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. So when the thing I have to do now is get proper numbers. We've got the higher level. We need to get absolute detail, but then we will launch an investment opportunity over the web, so everyone will hear about that and give you the opportunity to invest if you'd like to.
It's perfect for crowdfunding.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think it will just actually having a building shows sort of this indication of commitment to just talking about death, because there's so many buildings that are dedicated to death, like funeral directors or hospices or cemeteries or mortuaries or whatever. But you know, how many are built with around the needs of the living rather than the needs of the dead? So
wow,
I think it
that's
kind of
fascinating.
Yeah. I think it's going to be it's going to be really good.
I just want to say thank you so much, John. Thanks for taking the time.
Well, thanks for organising, Kerrie. And like I said, we don't have the resources to kind of offer much support, so it's really great that you've organised this. I hope it's useful for anyone who watches it. I hope it's useful for you guys. It's great to meet you all face to face, and hopefully we'll meet properly one time, in the flesh, as it were.
With a hug.
Yes.
Okay, well, on that note, I think I'm going to say goodbye. I'm going to stop the broadcast and say goodbye, but you all want to kind of say collective goodbye?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Kerrie, and thanks, John, and everybody else for being here. April and Vicki and Kat.
Yeah.
It's a bye from me until next time.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, goodbye and thank you.
Bye.
Bye.